make you hypnotize until you hip. Girl, let's 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 make you hypnotize until you hip.
What's going on, brother?
What's happening?
Going?
Figure out how to set this up right. What's going on with you? How you feeling?
I'm feeling good. We're going to let some people log on.
Yeah.
And then we're going to jump into it. I appreciate you taking time out this evening to join us.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm happy to be here, man. Like what you're doing.
Appreciate that. While we're waiting for people to join us, can you tell us briefly what's going on in your city as far as the COVID and the protest? What's the atmosphere like where you're at?
Sure. Well, I'm in Washington, D.C., my hometown, born and raised. So it's a lot going on with both situations. I mean, COVID, it's starting to, loosen up a little bit. We're in the first stage of the reopening, like a lot of places. But not a lot really going on. Most people still seem to be at home, but just getting back going slowly. But just even like in Maryland, Virginia, which is close by, it's sort of similar, but I know Virginia's got like a uptick in some parts of Virginia right now, so it's hard to say, but it's been pretty hard hit, the area like most major cities. And as far as the protests and everything, yeah, I mean, there was a big one down there, by the White House on Saturday. And there's been a lot, in neighborhoods all around the city and in the suburbs, outside the city, smaller areas doing protests and everything like that. So it's pretty active.
Cool. For everybody who's joining us right now, this is episode 46 of Hip Hop Lessons, formerly Quarantine Sessions. And I am with the founder of Hip Hop's Bible, Dave Mays. Thank you again for joining us.
Where you at?
Indiana.
Indiana, okay. Like Indianapolis or near there? Or?
About 30 minutes from Indianapolis.
Okay. So how close are you to Chicago?
3.5.
Okay.
So that's really nothing. Being from the Midwest, we can be in Detroit in 4 hours, Kentucky in 2 hours, Michigan 3 hours.
Yeah. So
it's not bad being from the Midwest.
You go by Sin-seer or?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Cool.
We're going to get to a little history and then bring us up to what you got going on today. If you could tell everybody where you were born and raised to get a better idea of Dave Mays and his vision for Hip Hop's Bible.
Yeah. Born and raised in right here in Washington, D.C., Northwest. Grew up here. I grew up actually more into go-go music than hip-hop because, hip-hop wasn't quite making the kind of noise in D.C. it was in some of the other cities, in those early days. We're talking about the early 80s, basically. For many years, hip-hop couldn't break into D.C. really at all for a long time, but I was listening to some rap music, in D.C., Sugar Hill Gang, Rappers Delight, of course, and, we had one radio station that would play a little bit of hip-hop, so Curtis Blow and Salt and Pepper and that kind of stuff made it on the radio here. It was popular, but, go-go was really dominant by far.
What was the day in the life of Dave Mays coming up in Washington, D.C.?
I guess it depends on what what age we're talking, but um, I was a big basketball player growing up. You know, uh, from little league all the way up. So I was on the playground a lot, balling. Um, had a couple little business things going. I had a pretty big lawn mowing business kind of throughout junior high and getting to high school. You know, maybe 70 accounts, and it was a big deal for me back then. Nice hustle. Um, but just school, basketball, tennis. I played a lot of tennis as well. Once I got to high school, I started getting into tennis. Um, Girls.
At some point, yeah.
Regular stuff.
You were talking about hip hop having a hard time breaking into Washington D.C. At what point did it start to break in and capture Dave May's attention?
Well, I mean, like I said, I was listening to the songs that made it down here. I remember hearing Rappers Delight. I was in probably in sixth grade when that came out. And reciting all the lyrics, running through the playground and stuff. Um, but I really got into hip hop much more heavily when I went away to college. Which was in '86, fall '86. I started at Harvard, which is, just outside of Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts. And when I got there, um, I met a guy. Interestingly, I mean, Harvard. It was a big kind of shell shock for me in a lot of ways because the people there were very, very different from the people that I was used to growing up in D.C. I went through the public school system in D.C. So, you know, Harvard, just the average person there is just from a very, just a very kind of privileged, removed sort of backgrounds, boarding schools and private schools. And, especially back then, I think it's, seems like Harvard's got a little more diversified even now, but back then it wasn't much. But the one guy that I met my freshman year and living in the same dorm room, I hear some rap music playing out of a room across the hallway, and I go and knock on the door, and um, it's this kid from Philly named John Schechter, and he's like this huge rap music fan. He knew way more about rap music at that point than I did because, Philly was like baby New York, back in the 80s. And, in addition to having some of their own artists coming up with, Schoolie D and Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince. I mean, they had, DJ Cash Money, Tap Money, all the DJs and everybody from Philly. They had a big scene, but um, he was much more heavily into rap music by that time than I was. And um, we decided to join the Harvard radio station. And they had a pretty powerful signal for a college station, but they played classical music almost, not 24 hours a day, but the majority of the week they were playing classical music. But they had some little slots on the weekend, late night, um, and we were able to convince them to give us a show late on Friday nights. It started out as an hour, and we called it Street Beat. So that was in my freshman year that got started. So when that first started, I had all my go-go tapes. Go-go was really only on cassette tapes. It wasn't, songs or records. You had to get dubs of tapes or PA tapes, they would call, like that would live, tape live from the PA system at the go-go's. And so I started playing my go-go music on the radio show. People hated it. I mean, they would call it in like, turn that bullshit off. What is that? Man, they had no concept. Most people, I've found over the years, tend to react that way to go-go. If you didn't grow up and haven't been exposed to it, you don't really connect with it the way people who grown up in this area. It's just in our blood. But anyway, people hated it. I tried for a while. A go pick of the week I went down to, and even that got booed out of there. And so I got much more into hip hop starting in '86 with the radio show, and that became like a big deal. The show actually became pretty popular in Boston. Boston didn't really have any urban or black radio stations. The one black station it had was an AM station, and it only was on during the daytime. And once it got dark, the radio just cut off until the morning. So there was really nowhere to hear hip hop in Boston other than a couple of college radio stations. So, we had a really big listenership, and I got really heavily into the show and promoting the show and the local music scene there, stuff like that.
Can you take me back to the early concept of developing the Source magazine? Started out as a one-page newsletter, is that correct?
Yeah.
So what was the idea going into that? Were you just fed up with seeing the Right On magazines and the cheesy, there wasn't a lot of magazines that felt like they were, knowledgeable, I guess.
Right.
Had Yo, I think Right On, Rap Masters. What was the concept that you had going into that? Was it just a one-off, or did you vision a whole magazine?
Yeah. Well, the way that came about was, like I was saying, I was doing this radio show, and I was really focused on building that up and making it, a bigger, broadening the listenership, and always, trying to get the newest music first, get those exclusives, get the white labels from the record company. So I was big, like calling all the labels in New York and LA and getting contacts there, and trying to get, music and everything. And then also the Harvard station allowed you to sell sponsorships for your radio show. Most college stations don't do that, but this one, Harvard's happened to do that. So that was the other reason when I got involved at the radio station, I was excited. I was like, oh, okay, cool. I can, try to make some money, because they let you, as a student, you could make a commission on any sales. So that first year or two, I was going around town to local record stores and clothing stores and sneaker stores and stuff like that. And hey, I got this radio show, Street Beat on the Harvard station, and would you guys be interested in sponsoring? And people were kind of laughing at me like, oh, who's listening to a rap show on Harvard station, And so that inspired me to start building up a mailing list of my listeners, because I knew I had listeners, a lot of them all over the city, because the phone lines would ring all night during the show, and people would call from all parts of the city, the suburbs around Boston. We had a lot of people that loved and tuned in, loyally. So I would go on the radio every week and say, hey, you want to join the Street Beat mailing list? Call in now, and I'll take your name and address and put you on the mailing list. And I really didn't have a plan for the mailing list. It was, part of it was, I'm going to build up this list and go back to these stores and be like, look, I got 1,000 names and addresses of listeners all over Boston, to try to get them to advertise and prove my audience. So I would type everybody's name and address in a little, computer after the show every week. And I built up over 1,000 names and addresses. Now, in the process of answering the phones all the time and talking to fans and listeners, I noticed there was a lot of questions. People wanted to know, when's the new Public Enemy album coming out? Or, who produced, that new Big Daddy Kane single? And, just wanting to know information. And, because of the relationships at those record labels, that I was building, I was able to get, information, from the promotions people at the labels would give me little bits and pieces of information. So that's when the idea came of like, hey, why don't I start a newsletter with this mailing list that I have, and how, I can sell some ads on the back side of the newsletter, and I'll mail it out for free to all my listeners and to all the record label, all the industry people I had contacts with, and give them hip hop news and information. So, that first issue, which is behind me, you might be able to see the yellow sheet there. That's all it was. Just one page. On the back, there was like four ads, 3 local record stores, and one ad I got from Jive Records. Like $125 for the Jive Records ad and $75 for the record store ads. And man, I was happy. I'm like, okay, boom, I got something here. And went from 1 page to 6 pages to 12 pages, and quickly sort of envisioned it as a magazine. I really wasn't. I really didn't pay attention to like the Right-Ons and the Black Beats. I was never really into those magazines, and as you know, like they really didn't have very much information, just a lot of pictures and kind of goofy stuff. So I read a book pretty early on about the history of Rolling Stone magazine, which I didn't know anything about either at that time. And Rolling Stone, had been started in the late 60s by this young dude named Jan Winter. He was, around my age, a little older. I was 19 when I started the Source. And he started Rolling Stone as this underground newspaper for rock and roll fans. And, I read the whole story of how he did it and saw a lot of similarities between rock and roll and hip hop. Youth movements, music, but, there was a lot of political stuff going on with the, rock and roll fans in those days. And, Rolling Stone became like the voice of a generation throughout the 70s and 80s. It became, really, really influential. So that became my idea very early on. I want to create the Rolling Stone for the hip hop generation. And I always thought it could be bigger than Rolling Stone because I knew that hip hop was bigger than rock and roll in terms of the diversity of its audience. Most people these days know rock and roll was created by black people, black musicians, and it was sort of, co-opted and turned into white music, over the years throughout the 60s. But, hip hop wasn't going that route. Everybody, white, black, Latino, Chinese, whatever, we all were listening to hip hop, and the artists were the original artists that created it were still the popular ones. So I was like, hip hop can be bigger than rock and roll, and that's how it got started.
What kind of trials and errors did you encounter in the early stages?
Oh man, I mean, everything was trial and error. Everything was learned as I go along. I didn't have any experience in it. I didn't really have anybody really helping me. So just, I always, like I said before, I was kind of entrepreneurial, and it was just like, just going to figure it out. It's not that complicated. Just had to start figuring out how to print the magazines. Back then it was, computers were just getting started. There wasn't, all that kind of software for things. It was much different. We had to like paste up the first issues, by hand, but, just learning how to print, how to do the advertising. One of the most important things that made the Source really successful and really influential was building my own distribution. What I realized was, the mom and pop record store was, the one place in every city where people went, hip hop fans. You go to your local record store, no matter what city you were in or what neighborhood you were in, every neighborhood had at least one mom and pop record store.